This one's a bit tricky. So I'm going to take off the tie and we're going to really get into it because this one has some detail that really needs to be understood. It's called the railway line principle. It's really simple once the penny drops, but it sounds really complicated. The basis of the railway line principle is that you treat every single item or issue on an agenda as a separate railway line. A train cannot run on two railway lines at the same time. It needs to run on one line. So, a meeting starts with an agenda. That's line number one. It's the agenda line. While you're on the agenda, you don't talk about other things, you just talk about what's on the agenda. As you proceed, there'll be things like the apologies. The apologies are a separate railway line. While you're on apologies, you don't talk about anything else, you only talk about apologies. Then you may move on to matters arising or business arising. That's a separate railway line. And while you're on that railway line, you don't talk about anything else. You only talk about matters arising or business arising. And then you get to an issue perhaps where you may have a motion. Let's call it a main motion. That motion becomes a separate railway line, the main motion railway line. And while you're on that railway line, you don't talk about anything else, except you may get an amendment. And so when you reach the point where there's an amendment moved and accepted, you're now on yet another railway line. When you're on that railway line, you don't talk about anything except the amendment. You don't talk about the motion, you don't talk about the agenda, you just talk about the amendment. Now the amendment can be carried or lost. If it's carried, then it goes back to the main motion railway line, and it's like having a carriage added. There's now an amendment, so it's now the amended motion, and that's what you talk about. You may get a second amendment, and so same thing happens again. You move to another railway line, which is the second amendment railway line, and you have that dealt with. Now let's assume that that second amendment is lost. What happens is you just move back to the amended motion railway line, or if it was the first amendment, just to the main motion, and you continue as if nothing has happened. Now you may get a procedural motion. Someone may move that the matter be referred to a committee. So that then is a separate railway line. While you're on that railway line, that procedural motion that you move to a committee, you don't talk about anything else except that issue that we move to a committee. When that's dealt with, you move back to the main motion if that procedural motion was lost, or if it was carried, you move all the way back to the agenda railway line and you proceed until the next motion happens. There's two other things. The first is, what if there's a point of order? Well, it's exactly the same thing. No matter when a point of order happens, the point of order is a separate railway line and you deal with the point of order. The person leading the meeting needs to rule on the point of order, and once that ruling is made, then you go back to where you were. The second thing is sometimes, and it's very, very rare, but sometimes you'll get an amendment to an amendment. No different. You simply move to a second railway line or another railway line, which is the amendment to the amendment railway line. And while you're on that, you don't talk about anything else except the amendment to the amendment. When you put that, you come back to the amendment. When you put that, you come back to the main motion. When you put that, you come back to the agenda. The railway line principle is crystal clear in your mind once the penny drops, and it's worth really working on getting that clear in your mind. It will help people with any type of meeting, whether it's a formal meeting or whether it's an informal meeting. The railway line principle applies. If you're in an informal meeting, every aspect that you're talking about needs to be thought of as a railway line, and you only talk about that. So the railway line principle, it's the key to meeting momentum and keeping meetings on track.